All right. Hello, everybody. Well, welcome back to Weather Legends. We got a new episode today. We're going to be talking about, not snow. We're going to be talking about something else, wind and wildfires, and what's been going on here the past several weeks and months, for that matter, across parts of the nation. Not every part, but we've been seeing an awful lot of this stuff, right? What's been going on with this wind too across the tri-state area, across parts of the country? That's been sort of wreaking havoc here in many spots. But things have been changing. We've got Joe Rayo to join us today. We've got meteorologist Joe Chaffee with us. Hello, good to see you both again.
Yellow.
And yeah. So great to see you here on this interesting day where we have this dramatic change in season still going on across the country. And we've been seeing some big changes. But I want to know, what's been going on with this pattern the past several weeks and months, it seems? We hear about all these fires, all this crazy weather. Now we're getting flooding. I mean, what has been going on? You guys have been covering, of course, on the Joe and Joe show, all these, national ups and downs. But lately, we've been talking a lot about, I guess you've been hearing it the past several, let's say, for that matter, months, about the drought situation. And let me see if I can get the drought on there. Let me see. Okay, that's the national drought map there. And we're still seeing a lot of spots across the nation that are, experiencing some very dry conditions. But, this pattern, I believe, is starting to change. What do you think, Joe Chaffee? Have you been noticing changes lately with this pattern?
Well, I don't know that I've seen anything on a broad scale that would qualify as a change. I think you're seeing the usual March into April noise and the usual, here we are in April and here comes, a blast of cold air that comes in for a day or two and maybe it doesn't get out of the 40s for a day or so. I don't know if I've seen anything really change. What I thought was interesting on that drought map was that the area that you're if you could bring it back up, pretty much that whole area that's between the East Coast and the plains where there's no drought is the area that's going to get pummeled with
right.
Tons of rain. Yeah, which is usually that is the case. The places that need it don't get it, and the places that don't need it get, way too much of it. Yeah, I really don't see. I would really like to see, in order for me to just at least see a substantial change, and I mentioned this on a prior podcast, because everybody pays attention to what's going on in the Pacific, and hardly anybody ever pays any attention to what's going on in the Atlantic. And the Atlantic has been this, all winter long, has been this ruler from west to east, from North Carolina to Spain. You could walk it in a straight line. And it buckles a little bit here and there, but I think until you see the Atlantic make a significant change, you're just going to have to plot along with what we've been getting.
Yeah, and I could have put a map together, Joe Rayo. I don't know if you're a kind of proponent of what the La Nina pattern is doing here. I mean, is it really finally coming to an end and weakening? Is it going to the La Nada, or are we still seeing this stubborn La Nina sticking around here, Joe?
This took the longest time for this La Nina to take place. I mean, every so often I would check with the Climate Prediction Center as to the latest on the La Nina. This goes back to late summer and early fall of last year. Oh, La Nina is coming. Oh, La Nina is coming. And I kept saying it's going to arrive by October, November. Then they said, well, it's going to arrive by November, December. Oh, it's going to arrive by January. And I'm saying to myself, when the heck is this stupid thing supposed to be here? Finally, they settled in during the early to mid part of the winter and said, all right, we have La Nina. But now it looks like La Nina is going to be moving on out sometime by late winter or early spring. So this was, if this indeed was a La Nina pattern that we were in, it was probably one of the weakest La Nina patterns that we've had in recent years. And now, as you mentioned, Rich, the pattern is expected to be neutral, or as it is now being called, a La Nada pattern. Mm-hmm. So really, I think it's going to be a matter now of just waiting to see when the El Nino is going to kick in. Usually an El Nino follows a La Nina, but as to when that's going to happen, we really cannot say for sure. I will tell you that the long-range forecast from the Climate Prediction Center, and these are the people who specialize in long-range outlooks, probabilities of precipitation and temperature, are saying that in the next 2-3 months, the area to watch in terms of lack of any precip or below normal precipitation will be much of the western United States, most notably across the central and southern Rockies, where they're expecting very little. Meanwhile, in the nation's midsection, where they certainly don't need any more precipitation, but are going to get a lot of it over the next week or so, they are expecting a continuation of unseasonably wet conditions, particularly so from the Tennessee River Valley and on up into the Ohio River Valley and maybe even the Great Lakes as well. So the places that we mentioned before who don't need it are going to get more, and the places that really could use the water or can use the moisture, looks like they're not going to get much of anything.
Yeah, that was
the 8 to 14 day map, though, I think is going to be correct. Where we're going after this weekend, we're going to go into a drier pattern, colder in the east, warmer in the west, and not a whole lot of precip going on for next week anyway. Beyond that, it'll be, it's probably going to stay for a week and then go about its merry way and change into morph into something else. But just a good touch on the La Nina thing. The thing that I found comical was because we just came out of a La Nina last year or two, whatever it was, and of course all the long range forecast gods that are out there were not only forecasting the La Nina, but of course everything has to be apocalyptic. So it's going to be a super La Nina, and we're going to burn up in the wintertime, and it's going to go to 90 in Caribou, Maine. All this stuff. And it turned out that the outcome in the East was in the East and in the Deep South was far different than what everybody was forecasting. So I don't really put a whole lot of stock because whenever people ask me about the long range, it's like I really have never been able to get my head around it. I'm a short to medium range kind of guy. I like, inside a week, week and a half, 2 weeks, I can kind of figure out what the broad pattern is going to be. That's where my strength is. And I stay in that lane. I don't start getting into 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, next decade. So grand solar minimums, grand solar maximums, dust and all the rest of it. That's for somebody else to, that's for other people. I don't do that.
Yeah. So basically what I'm trying to say is we've seen a year here in forecasting where I don't know, maybe it's me that I don't remember seeing this many fires and the intensity of the wildfires in many different parts of the country. Now, of course, Los Angeles, we all remember, of course, this past January here across parts of Los Angeles, the Palisades fire. I mean, historical stuff here. I mean, I don't remember seeing, I guess, the extent and the time frame of the damage that was done out here. Now,
Rich,
I'm
just going to say, I just want to put this in here right up front. You can't really discuss. It's almost like you need to put California in its own category because you can't discuss the natural phenomena of wildfires without discussing the politics of California, because those two, I think, are intricately linked.
Yep. But the situation, I guess, out there with the Santa Anas, have we seen winds that went over like 70, 80 miles per hour out there? Was that a unique kind of setup that happened back in January, or was that something that they're used to seeing out there?
The Santa Ana season. And if anybody is watching out there right now who might even be from the West Coast, they can correct me. But I always felt the Santa Ana season was September, October, maybe sometimes into November. I, for the life of me, don't remember a Santa Ana this intense or this dramatic, deep into the winter season, the January. I said, is it possible that you can have that? Well, obviously, it was, because that's what we saw this past January. And what a contrast, because just a year earlier, California was getting pummeled by almost every other day by a storm from the Pacific, an atmospheric river event that was hitting them with all kinds of floods, and that's that was kind of like on the opposite end of the scale. I mean, they that's their rainy season, but they were going off the chart with all the wetness they were getting just a year before. And now they went to the other side of the extreme, the other side of the spectrum, and were abnormally warm and dry. So
yeah, they hardly had any rain. They the first 3 months of the rainy season for them there was nothing. I mean, literally nothing. So that that kind of helped to set the table for this.
Yeah, but I mean, it went on for what, about almost a month, right? I mean, that they had this going on. I mean, it was a long stretch of time, right? Throughout almost the entire month. I mean, how long? I mean, typically the wildfire situations kind of last. I mean, a few days, maybe sometimes.
Well, but judging from what I've read about this and seen about this, it was grossly mishandled. From what, and it was also one of the when you watch Titanic, okay. I prefer the 1954 version with Barbara Stanwyck and Clifton Webb, but that's me. But when you watch Titanic and you see it, you just think like if they had gone, if they had made a turn here, if they, it's like a series of decisions that ultimately leads to this calamity. And I think that's what, when you look at the whole scope of what happened in California, you can come to the same conclusion. A long series of bad decisions over the course of probably decades set this up, or it was set up for something like this to happen. And
we see something like that happen in Maui. You talk about political considerations or whatever, with the wildfires that literally ravaged the island of Maui in Hawaii. From what I was able to read later on, the guy who was in charge refused to issue any kind of an emergency or any kind of an alert for the fires at the very beginning, when if he did, then they still would have had fire and they still would have had damage, but it would have been anywhere near what they ended up with. So again, bad decisions being made by somebody who really shouldn't have been in that position to make a decision.
And in Southern California, so they decided to shut down they shut down the reservoir. I mean, who shuts down a reservoir? I'm not quite understanding that. I mean, I know they do all sorts of water management out there, so I shouldn't criticize them, but I'm asking the question: why was there a reservoir shut down? And the other thing is too, Rich and Joe, and I think you may agree with me on this. We also have to examine why are we building homes in areas that are prone to wildfires? I asked when they happen up in Northern California. And look, I know I got a house here in the woods, and by the way, where I live here in North Georgia, we're in the Western Carolinas. We've seen that in the last week or two. Prone to wildfires when we won't call them wildfires, but prone to fires that break out, and under very, very dry conditions, which sometimes we get that here, but they do at least have the way they design this area, the infrastructure, and all the rest of it. For the most part, it gets handled. Now, I know it's an apples and oranges comparison between what here and what goes on the West Coast, but it just goes to the fact that I think that they need to seriously have to ask themselves some serious questions about infrastructure and how to put it, build it correctly, because weather's going to do what it's going to do. Okay.
Yeah.
In this case, it did it in January, which, as Joe pointed out, that's not usually when you see these, the Santa Ana winds. So they have to seriously consider, they have to figure this out, and it's a big problem because California is a tough state, loaded with all sorts of 400,000 regulations or whatever it is that they have. You can't even put on a roof. By the way, in California, if you in much of California, if you put a roof on your house, you have to have 3 inspections. Okay, I mean, I'm putting a roof on my house. I don't need the government to come in and inspect my house, my roof. If it falls in, it's on me. But the thing is, it's like there's so much bureaucracy to deal with this fire issue that they have, and the weather part of this is always going to be the wild card. So they have to figure this out, because otherwise this is going to happen again.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, we're just getting into spring and summer. It's already had some record highs out there. And before you know it, we're going to be talking about all this nonsense again. And I mean, are we ready for it? And that's the big question. So bring in Bill Corbell, meteorologist Bill Corbell, joining us as well. So we've got some more legends here to help us out.
You need to Bill to tell your driver to find a faster, accessible route.
From JF, guys, it took me an hour and 15 minutes to make a 25-minute drive. I thought I had plenty of time. I don't know what's going on. And JFK is a mess anyway.
Well, I'm going to tell you, my theory is that this is the unintended consequence of congestion pricing in Manhattan. Nobody's driving their cars into New York City anymore, so they're driving them in the boroughs.
And Kennedy's being rebuilt. And if you don't get lost trying to find a terminal, it's a miracle. But anyway, we're here. We're talking about the fires, and I still remember that big fire back in '95. I was kind of between jobs then. I wasn't on radio and I wasn't at News 12, so I didn't have a whole lot to do with it. But yeah, there you go. And guys, I'm sure you guys remember this. It burned.
I was in that smoke somewhere.
Yeah, were you? Yeah, I know. It burned, I don't know what, 7,000 acres or something. It was just huge. It went on for days, and it had been like this, a very dry month, a very dry day. I did check the weather that day at MacArthur Airport, and the high was 91. The low, and then what the low was, the dew point was as low as 45, which was the relative humidity in the 20% range. And the winds picked up in the afternoon. They had gusts at up to 30 miles per hour from the north.
Well, that's the one memory I have about the Suffolk wildfires, being there, near where the edge of the fires were, because I never experienced anything like that, and the wind was insane. I mean, from obviously there's like this huge temperature gradient going on with the temperature inside where the fire is and the outside temperature and so on. But I could not get over the wind. It was, 40, 45, 50 mile an hour gusts, all self-made by the fire and not necessarily by, a strong storm interacting with a big high or a hurricane nearby or something along those lines.
Yeah, and I tell you what, just recently we just had the other one here, a couple of weeks, about a month ago here, Bill. I mean, this was the one over by Gabreski. I mean, look at the wind. You can see how fast that wind is blowing. What we have, 40, something like that?
Yeah, it was the same thing. And virtually all these fires out here move from northwest to southeast, because it's with the west and northwest wind that you get the driest air. And that happened in March. So imagine in the middle of summer, after you've had like that August in '95 was very dry. I don't think there's any rain after the 8th of the month for the rest of the month and into September. It's just a critical thing. And of course, there are more people living out here now, maybe not dead smack in the middle of the Pine Barrens, but around its periphery. And I think you would talk about that. There are more people on the planet, more people here that are prone to these weather problems.
More people building houses where they shouldn't be building houses.
Yeah,
that needs to be said. I mean, it does need to be said. You should, if you're gonna build a house, if you're gonna build a home near an area of forest
or water,
right, that is the risk you take, and you're gonna pay for it with your insurance if you can even get it.
That's what
we'll pay for the insurance, because it'll increase. I love boats, moved out to Long Island, bought the house. I didn't even think about living on a canal or right by the water. I said, no.
Same here.
I'm up at 80-foot elevation up here in North America.
Well, you see what happens. I mean, I think after Sandy, it's like, I always dreamed of having a house in the water too, but I don't think I want to deal with that. I mean, it's just, you can see what can happen there. And as Joe was saying with the fires too, I mean, there's a lot of areas, not just in Long Island, but across New Jersey, across the West Coast. You live in these dry, parched areas that don't get rain or nothing for like months and months. Something's going to happen eventually. Like you said, Joe, eventually something's going to happen, right?
And an analogy in terms of the insurance, I mean, we look back to the 1960s and what Dr. Neil Frank, who at the one time was the director of the National Hurricane Center, imploring, those in the construction industry and Florida government, you cannot continue to build along the Florida coastline because of the fact that there's the danger of getting impacted by a major hurricane. And of course, the general thought was, well, they come along every once in a great while, but we're going to build. And sure enough, 30, 40 years later, we see that entire East Coast is just filled with all kinds of condominiums and hotels and buildings right near the coastline. Exactly what Dr. Frank was warning. And of course, we have already seen in more than a few cases. The most notable one, I think, in my mind, is Andrew back in the 1990s. I think it was 1992, just cutting across Florida and just ramming into all of those homes and causing all kinds of problems. Of course, that is, if you have insurance, the first thing they're going to ask you is, where do you live, and where do you live in proximity to the ocean? And immediately you find that your premiums are going to be sky high, or maybe they're not even going to offer you any insurance to begin with because of the fact that you're under the gun in terms of hurricanes.
My brother he's got a house in Boynton Beach, right on the intercoastal. Okay. And he pays 36. Well, when I last asked him, which was about maybe 2 years ago, I think he said he pays $36,000 a year for insurance.
Oh my gosh.
What?
That's horrible.
$36,000.
That's ridiculous. Wow. It's insane. So, by the way, one of our viewers, Dennis, is checking in. I have to pronounce this word. Hello, Dennis. He says a metal roof with an intumescent layer. What is that?
I have that.
Explain, Joe Chaffee. Please explain.
Well, I don't know what the intermittent layer is, but I got the metal roof part on my house.
Does that help? What does that do to help?
Let's ask Dennis, because Dennis, he brought it up, and he's a firefighter, so or a fire chief, right, Joe?
Yeah.
He's a big cheese. He's a big cheese in the fire department.
Yeah. Okay.
He's been a firefighter for a good number of years, and he's
Dennis. If you haven't left us, if you're still with us,
I'll tell you how good he is. He's in the firefighters in Connecticut now. He lives in Connecticut. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame, yes, I saw that.
So he's
all right.
He knows.
Excellent. Well, speaking of firefighters, like I said, the reason I'm doing the show today is because I've just had way too many experiences, personal, besides the one we just had in Long Island, Bill, with the fires. And they've been hitting places that I didn't expect. My parents live in Myrtle Beach, down there, the Walker Woods, literally where, this fire kind of hit in the Carolina Forest area. And I just couldn't believe what I was seeing here. I mean, I got some videos here from this area too. Let me see if I can get the good ones here. But it was, the aerials here. Yeah, there's the aerial. Okay, of how vast and how, this is an area now in Myrtle Beach that you typically associate with humidity, a lot of rain, a lot of flooding, right? That's the swamp, right? Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden we're hearing wildfires in this area. It's just, I guess they can happen anywhere. Obviously, depending on what the situation is with the drought and what the conditions are throughout the year. But I guess now it's just looks like, I don't know, like, could these happen, for example, Joe, could they happen in Maine? Could they happen in Michigan? Could they happen in, somewhere else? It's just, we're just starting to see with these patterns going on with the drought. There's a lot of color on here, a lot of abnormally drought. I think it can
happen anywhere. I think it can happen. I'll tell you, I live in a rustic area. I live up in Putnam County, Putnam Valley, New York. I live on 6 acres of property, and 5 of those 6 acres is woodland, trees, grass, brush, And I can tell you that on more than one occasion, I've been up here now for over 20 years. There have been a few summers where it has gotten so dry here that, I mean, I remember one year I'm walking on my grass, my front lawn, and the grass was, and I heard crunching sounds.
Oh, wow.
And I'm saying to my wife, I'm saying to myself, God help us if we ever had anybody just flick a cigar ash into the woods or something like that. We're going to be.
I'll have to do that.
You know,
Gosh.
but I mean, like it makes you, you know, in situations like that, in summers or springs where there's the lack of precipitation, very quickly, at least where I am, it could get very dry, and I could see it happening. Thank God it has not, but it can happen. So if it can happen here, it can happen in Maine, it can happen in New Hampshire, it can happen anywhere where you have woodland and lots of trees and wood or whatever like that.
We get here in North Georgia, we get fire alerts all the time.
Really?
Yeah. In the last few weeks, probably at least 3 times that we've gotten where, you know, they don't want people burning anything. So it's everybody knows what a red flag warning means. So when the red flag warning goes up, and then there'll be, you know, an edict from the county that'll get released, and everybody will get it, and saying, thou shalt not do any controlled burns because it's too dry. So they're really good about that.
Good. Hey, Rich, can you do me a favor? Put that aerial photo of Myrtle Beach back up for a second.
Which one? The aerial photo? Yeah,
the aerial photo. Let me grab
this
that. This goes to Joe Chiaffi's point about houses where maybe they shouldn't be. There you see a huge forested area, and look at the houses that have been built right smack dab in the middle of it.
Yeah, I mean, who decided that? Who decided that was okay?
Yeah, it's just this is what's happening in a lot of communities, not just here, but other parts of the country, and you're seeing this happen. And you know, a lot of the thought was, you know, the wildlife, the bears, and everything, but now you're dealing with the fires, and it's amazing that, you know, in areas where you wouldn't even think, you know, okay, it's gonna burn, but then the situation, the condition is there for months and months, and it does. And this is why I'm saying, Bill, with the situation we've had here on Long Island, let me see if I can get this here, the stats here. You know, drought is a long-term thing. We always talk about this, you know, because it'll rain a few days, and I'll hear people say, "Oh, it rained last week. We had plenty of rain. The drought's over." Bill, explain why just because it rains a couple of times, it doesn't get rid of your drought.
Well, you know, I'm not entirely sure of all the details, but I can tell you one thing: if it hasn't rained for a long time, the ground is very hard, and if you get 2 inches from a thunderstorm, it just runs someplace. It doesn't soak in. So I think what you need is the consistent rainfall every few days. Get a little rain, keep the ground moist, and then you don't go through these wild streams. But look at this: December, over 6 inches of rain. January, 1/10 of that. It's just the ups and downs. I don't know. I think it's becoming more extreme. What do you guys think? In general, the weather, I think, has become more extreme in terms of temperature, wind, and most everything else.
Well, we seem to be, you know, we seem to do that. I mean, Joe and I have mentioned many times how we've noticed that there've been so many strange things that have happened weather-wise in the last few years. So yeah, it seems like the pendulum does swing. You got to be a little careful with that, if only because we all tend to zip code forecast. You know, our experiences are based on our zip code. So you know how people, you know, usually personalize it to the point that if it doesn't rain where they are, that means that nobody got rain. You know? So you got to be a little careful with this. But it does seem that we're pushing the envelope in both directions to an extreme. I know when you add them up and divide it by 2, it works out to being average. But we're just kind of seeing these wider swings from one side to the other.
And I mean, take a look at what happened just this last weekend at Central Park. 81 degrees for the high temperature, the first 80-degree high temperature so far this year of 2025. Then we had a backdoor cold front move through. That's no big deal. We've seen temperatures fall behind a backdoor front on many occasions. But with this particular backdoor front, we had a temperature drop of 26 degrees in 1 hour at Central Park between 5 and 6 in the afternoon. And that was the second greatest hourly temperature drop on record. The greatest was a 28-degree decline on March 28, 1921. And then the next day, the high temperature went from 81 one day to 48, the chilliest reading to follow a day with the first 80-degree reading.
Yeah.
150-plus year history of Central Park records.
That's pretty impressive. And at one point, it was 81 in the city and at JFK.
And in Iceland.
43. And it was 43 out in West Hampton, the airport out there. Okay, I'll say it.
It's crazy.
Was that the day that Islip got to 81 and set a record?
82 degrees, record of 82, and then 82. Came down to dropped like 20.
I was watching I had the Weather Service hazards map plotted up. That it was updating temperatures, every time a station would send out a fresh update. And I see 30s in southeast. 30s and low 40s in southeastern New England. And you just watched it sort of back its way westward as every hour went by, and see these big drops. There was one, I think it was at like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, where LaGuardia was 49 and Newark was 82 or 52 and 82. Something there was a 30-degree spread over that handful of miles. So the backdoor front basically was running down somewhere along First Avenue in Manhattan. So.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about, these extremes. It just seems, everyone keeps talking about what's happening, what's changing with the planet, what's changing over these days. There's a lot of discussion on that. But, these extremes, I guess the question, you see these scenes from like, if I can put it up there, scenes from like Myrtle Beach again, some of the wildfires that were occurring and how close they were to the towns and the firefighters trying to put these things out. And just, for about a week, this was going on. They're still smoldering down there too. That's the thing. This hasn't really been completely shut off yet. They're still in a situation where they have to be on guard if they do get another dry shot coming in. But as the season changes,
in general here in the Southeast, we had a very cold winter, and it was a very dry winter.
Yes,
we went. We would go 2 or 3 weeks at a time without seeing a drop of rain or snow. I have to put that in there too. It was an exceptionally dry winter here.
Yeah, and I guess too, Bill and Joe, the snowpack. I guess when you get a good season with decent snowpack, it obviously keeps the ground from completely drying out. It seeps in. It's just slowly. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It took 9 days. I had 4 inches of snow. It took 9 or almost 10 days for that snow to disappear. And not so much because it was too cold. Now, it was cold during that stretch. But most days we went above freezing. And even on some of those days we went into the 40s. The ground was so frozen and so solid that it just the snow just would not go away, particularly if you went in shady areas. It finally took a day where the temperature went up to 70 to pretty much turn everything outside into a mud fest. But yeah, when it gets dry here in the Southeast, which is not really, we don't really hear too much about the Southeast U.S. with these fires until recently, of course. But when it doesn't rain here, when it doesn't rain after about 4 or 5 days, the ground's like cement.
Yeah. And I'll go back to this map since Bill joined us a little bit late with his fun traffic on the Belt Parkway there. But I kind of drew this up, Bill, with my kind of vision of what the La Nina pattern's been doing. We'll kind of finish on this today because the question is the pattern finally changing? Are we starting to see the battle go on where we get into more of a normal pattern, or has this been normal, or what are we seeing, Bill? In terms of the patterns you've seen in the past, is this kind of unique, or is this just something that we should be used to now?
Again, every year is different, and it looks like we're starting to ease out of this one, which kept the storms away from the coast. Was there one coastal storm? Did one storm come up the coast this winter?
No, I don't think any major ones. No.
And that's bizarre.
And that's the other thing too, as Joe we mentioned. I guess I was watching Joe and Joe the other day too. The second component to this has been the lack of the NAO, the downstream blocking, the Greenland block. We haven't heard a thing about, not a peep about the blocking.
That is probably the most overrated, overhyped phenomena. It hasn't been around pretty much for the last 4 or 5 winters, and in spite of the fact that, okay, every once in a while you get into a very short period where the NAO is negative. The model forecasting is ridiculous because it shows, it'll show blocking in the longer range almost, I don't say all the time, but frequent enough. It never happens. So I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah, I just find it, like Bill said, where are our coastal storms? Whatever happened to our nice overriding soaking rains, Joe Rayo? What happened to the atrocities? Remember, you used to call them atrocities that used to come through the Hudson Valley. Where did they go? I haven't seen those.
Well, all I can tell you is that the Climate Prediction Center issued their latest forecast on the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, back on the 13th of March. That's actually more than a few weeks ago. And they're saying that the neutral, or La Nada, pattern is favored to develop in the next month and persist through the Northern Hemisphere summer. And they're giving a 62% chance, which isn't really a heck of a great chance, but 62% chance for a neutral pattern for June through August. And then after that, who knows?
If you want coastal storms, the pattern over the Atlantic for much of the time for the last 4 or 5 years has been this sort of flattish west to east, nothing out there. There's nothing to buckle. Storms can't, lows off the southeast coast can't climb. That's been an almost semi-permanent state for certainly the last 3 winters. So, look, I will say this. At some point, it's going to go away. When it does, and the pattern reverts, as we mentioned earlier about, stretching the rubber band and going to extremes, it will snap back, and it will snap back in a big way. I'm not saying it'll be just like March of 2018, where you had 4 major nor'easters in 2 weeks, but don't be shocked if when this nor'easter drought is broken, it's going to be broken in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and basically the question too, are these? Look, I'm a boater, and Bill's a pilot, and the winds make a big, have a big factor in our lives of what we do. Are these winds ever going to subside? Everyone's asking me the question, Bill. What's going on with the winds? I've never seen. I'm not saying never, but this has been a pretty big stretch of windy conditions for the last several weeks. Bill.
Yeah, I think part of it is everything's moving so quickly. You don't get a chance when you get a cold front go by, and the winds are always strong behind it for maybe a day. But then the high pressure moves in, the winds die down. You get a day or two of light winds, and they back around the other way. But with these quicker changes with the west-east flow, I think it's happening more quickly, and it certainly affects aviation a lot, especially those of us who don't fly the big airplanes. The strong winds are something you try to avoid, certainly while landing or taking off. And when you see flags like that, has it been very windy? Yeah. Yesterday was a good example. It was howling out there. Today,
and it didn't look like it was going to be either. I went for a walk, and I was like, this wind just never stops, and it's a cold wind too. It's like a chilly midwinter wind, like a January wind, and how many calm days have we had? Think about it. How many? Not a lot. Not a lot. I know I've Chaffee, we fish a lot, and we're trying to get out in the ocean. It's been like we've been locked out. It just can't get out there. It's just
even here we've seen more than our fair share of windy days this winter. And in the mountains, the wind plays tricks on you. So you can go one spot and there's not much going on. You go to another spot and it's 15 to 25. By the way, they put up high wind warnings up here. For the criteria for high wind warnings here is different. and wind advisories, because they'll put up wind advisories for gusts of 25 or 30.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, but I see them again. Yeah, Northeast, another wind advisory up. I don't think I've ever seen, Bill, the amount and the volume and the frequency of wind advisories or high wind watches in the last 6 to 10 months here. I mean, it's been incredible.
If you're going to see it, you're going to see it in spring, I would think, late winter, spring, when you still have the very cold oceans around here and cold air masses around coming down from the north, and you get warm air intruding into it, and it's the difference in temperature, of course, that sets up difference in pressure, sets up the wind. So is it that unusual? Yeah, it's been a little windier than usual, but back in the fall, I don't think it was very windy, was it? I don't really remember. These short-term changes, you just have to live with. Remember, this planet's been going for a long time. We have little idea of what the weather was like much over 150 years ago. New York City records go back to the late 1800s, which is pretty good. But, what happened 200, 300, 400, there's some information, but it may well have been that we've had windier times. We've had more fires in Long Island at other times, and there's nobody here.
And a planet where there was no ice at the poles.
Well, yeah.
That's
there was that. Well. And there was Long Island. It was the southern edge of the last glacier.
Right.
I've been skiing here in the middle of summer.
Well,
I've been.
So, Joe and Joe, do you think we're going to flip this pattern and start to get more into a rainier pattern across the east, like we're used to seeing, and catch up with on some of the precipitation? Do you see that from some of your synoptic discussions, or is it kind of like been the same story over and over every week?
Well, I mean, the winter, December, January, and February were so very cold, and you figure, now we're in a pattern where we're going to be seeing this type of condition maybe continue right on into the spring. And what happened? March was like at Central Park, 4.5 degrees above normal. All of a sudden, it looked like we were trending toward a colder pattern, and then all of a sudden, boom, up went the temperature in March. I really, as Joe pointed out, you're good for maybe, a week or so, or maybe a little beyond that in terms of making forecasts, but making these long range outlooks, looking ahead to what's going to happen in the next several weeks or next several months, we have the Climate Prediction Center people to try to make those long range predictions. I try to stay away from that for the most part. I don't really know what we're going to be looking at, whether or not it's going to be a pattern. I mean, right now it seems like we're in an unusually wet pattern, but it supposedly is going to, flip and go to a drier pattern during the middle or latter part of April. But I don't know. I can't really, give you an idea, what we're going to be seeing in terms of either precipitation or temperature. We just kind of have to play it by ear, I guess. Joe?
And the only thing I saw a few people opining about the fact that the polar vortex in the stratosphere blew up a few weeks earlier than it normally does. I'm sorry, when I say blew up, fell apart. Because this time of year, the big gigantic polar vortex low disappears and the big stratospheric ridge builds up over the polar region. And it seemed that that broke down sooner, which is probably, they were correlating that to an increasing amount of severe weather episodes. We've certainly been seeing that over the last 4 weeks. I don't know. I saw the models into the middle range want to have a ridge in the west and a trough in the east, but I didn't see anything that really said to me, okay, here comes something that's going to make it rain for a couple of days, or nothing out of the ordinary. So I think we're just going to probably continue on this, this sort of this pattern that we've been in, or at least another few. We'll get cold next week, and then it'll warm up to some extent again. But I don't know. I'm not getting a feel that there's something really active as far as rain is concerned, getting set up in the eastern part in the northeast and northern mid-Atlantic states. At least that from what I saw the last few days.
Yeah, because we want to avoid this situation, these scenes here that we saw back in '95. It was a very dry month. Maybe it was just that month that it happened to just pop. But with these stretches that we've been seeing, Bill, now, especially here across the tri-state on Long Island and the fire we had a few weeks ago, it does make you think, will we get some extremes again, whether it's too much rain or too little rain, things can be pretty bad here pretty fast. So
it will always do that.
Yeah. So
not day by day necessarily, week by week, but year by year or decade by decade, and then the longer patterns. We're in an what do they call interglacial right now, where the glaciers are still around,
Right,
starting to melt a little bit, and think of the impact that can have as this happens. I went on an Alaska cruise last August, and went north of Juneau. There's a glacier up there that they take all the tourists to see. And I took a picture. I wish I had it with me. And it's about a half mile away, the edge of the glacier. And there's a big sign in the viewing area that says, 80 years ago, that glacier was where you stand now. And that struck me really powerfully that, boy, things are changing around here. And we'll just have to, learn to live with it. You're not going to stop Mother Nature from doing what Mother Nature's done for millions and millions of years, I don't think.
Yep. And these patterns, they come and go. Next will be something else, and we'll be talking about maybe a whole different thing. Maybe next year about too much rain or something like that, and it could be anything.
Yep.
But it's
Exactly.
just trying to understand the long range patterns, I think, is the trick here, because everyone asks, what kind of summer is it going to be? What kind of winter is it going to be? And it's just there's so many variables that come into play. And when it's all said and done, you kind of shake your head and go, wait a second, is that what we really expected? I mean, did anyone expect to see this? That's how I started the show. These many wildfires across many parts of the country in a single year. And now now it seems like we're flipping. Now we're going to storms, tornadoes, severe weather. We'll talk about that later on the next show. But, it's just you get into these patterns and then you wonder, like, is it everywhere? Or is it just some places getting hit, or is it?
Wasn't just last year we had the smoke from the Canadian wildfires?
Yes, we did.
Visibility
A couple
dropped
years
in the
ago.
island under a mile in smoke.
A couple years
Okay,
ago.
I'll say it again. I never saw that before.
Yeah.
That was 2023 in June, and that was
That was 2 years ago. Okay.
A couple years ago, hundreds of miles away. That was Canada, and we had a day here that looked like it was the Armageddon. So,
Phenomenal.
but like I said, that's the discussion here. We'll just, we do this all the time. We look at maps, we study synoptic and long range and short range, and like Bill said, I've been saying to myself a lot in the last couple of years, I've never seen that before. You're right. It's getting weird. It's getting kind of weird. Like the snow you had that in the Gulf Coast, Joe and Joe. I mean, south of you, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what was that? I mean, Pensacola, Florida, 10 inches of snow, whatever it was. Never seen that before.
Pensacola, New Orleans, all of that.
Yeah. So, but that's just, I mean, is it all one thing, or is it all tied in, or is it just something that we're seeing with the planet trying to balance itself out, and we get these little periods where it gets weird, and that could be it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, this was a great discussion. Thank you very much. I guess we'll have another one coming up soon about tornadoes and storms. A lot of action going on across the nation this spring. It's been very busy, of course. So we're going to hit on some of that. And I'd like to ask some questions about that too when we get there. I'd like to pick your brains and see what you think. You've been doing this a long time, and curious to your feeling going way back into the decades. If all of a sudden tornadoes are more and bigger than they've ever been. But we'll get to that. Anyway, I just want to thank you guys. And of course, you can always check out the Joe and Joe show Sunday to Thursday. That's 7:35 Eastern time. And Papagano couldn't join us today, but check his radio forecast walks at 97.5, some of these great stations. And Bill and I will be updating on Weather Express as well now and then with some of our outlooks here for Long Island. But Joe, Bill, great show today. Thanks for chiming in and opining on this kind of wild year we've had. And I guess it can only get wilder in some place. At some point, we'll see some things. Spring, summer, it always gets weirder.
It's only about a third over. We still have 2/3 of a year to go before we and who knows what we're going to be talking about by the end of this year.
Let's not rush through it. I don't know rush to get the time to pass anymore.
Yeah, I got you. Well, in any case, let's
See you guys.
Somebody shut the wind off, okay? Thanks for joining Weather Legends. We'll see you soon.